So, Anthony, can businesses afford to take the risk when it comes to ransomware?
I think a lot of businesses will say yes to that, but I think the reality to that is that it's not because there's brand reputation damage at stake, and not only brand reputation, revenue, but also then personal damage to every employee that's potentially impacted by a ransomware breach. So I think, like everything in an insurance type of scenario, you can take the risk, but if it was up to me, I'd be looking to proactively look at how you actually deal with ransomware upfront.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us. I'm so excited about this discussion. It's all about ransomware, and I know everyone's talking about it at the moment, but we're going to get some tips and tricks from you directly. For those that don't know who you are, though, obviously I do, tell us a bit about you and your role at Veeam.
Yeah, so thanks for that. So yeah, obviously looking forward to talking about ransomware in 2024, which is still such a pressing threat for a lot of businesses. So, bit of background on myself: I'm the regional CTO for APJ at Veeam Software. My background is in cloud and service providers, which prior to Veeam I'd been in for 20 plus years, and now obviously in this role, which is also a global role, leading our
Mm.
drive with our customers, and also being almost like a conduit between sales, R&D, and our customer base from a global perspective. So it's really fun, really engaging, and obviously where we sit with Veeam Software is we sit right in the middle of data protection, which feeds itself into ransomware, which is what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. And cybersecurity is still one of the biggest things that are on Australian business minds. I know even as we just came out of the Christmas period, it's when things really do ramp up. I mean, what can people do to really help protect themselves? What is the potential impact?
Yeah, when we talk about this we can talk about it on two levels, right? From a personal perspective, but I think, more predominantly from a business organizational point of view. What we found over the past 12 to 18 months and talking with a lot of CIOs, CEOs, business owners within the company, so not so much the technical guys, but more, that upstream
Mm,
conversation about the outcome is what can you do as a company to protect yourself? And at Veeam, and what we personally would see there is there's three facets to it. There's education at the front end, which is critical. So educating your employees about what is at
mm,
risk, what could be a potential entry point for an attack.
yeah.
Which I think, if you take a look at that more broadly, that extends itself into a lot of the scams that we're seeing just in general everyday life.
Mm,
But when it's amplified and puts at risk of business, that's when organizations need to think about how they actually weave that in.
exactly. Yeah, and humans are still the biggest risk, which a lot of people you can have great policies, you can have the best, systems in place, but it's still humans that are kind of making us fail a little bit there.
Yeah, it's the weakest link concept, right? Like you're only as strong as that weakest link, and absolutely, humans, employees, people are the weakest link there. So education is so
Mm,
important, together with that front of mind strategy, which is, from an IT perspective, how do you put in your front of house, front of shop
mm,
systems to protect yourself, preemptive, detection of ransomware, bad things happening, but then also configuration, making sure that as platforms, data systems, applications are moving from on premises to a cloud environment, how do you protect those? Because it's a different
exactly.
game at that point. And that's where we've seen a lot of the bigger threats that we saw last year come out. If we think about all the most popular ones in Australia that made the news, uh, those uh, those attacks all stemmed from something being not configured internally correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And I think that's what people think. It's an outside threat, but really there is a lot of risks involved internally that you have to manage as well. And I think that's what probably a lot of people don't think about. And I think that education piece comes into it quite heavily. It's okay, not only just what to look for, but also what to do if it happens. Because it's not really a case of if, but when now, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, I think we'll all get sick of saying that
Yeah.
in 2024. It's not a matter of if but when. It's kind of like the big hype thing for ransomware. But I think everyone just accepts that at some point there's going to be a threat against your
Mm,
company and your organization. I think one of the biggest things before you get to how do you actually stop this? What's the best method to actually recover from an
mm,
incident like that? What I think works really well is talking about the real personal impact of an event like this, not only from a company perspective, which includes brand damage, revenue loss, but then what does it mean a couple levels down? So if I go to an IT staffer who's responsible for a platform, what does it mean for them? Well, this is actually food on their table for their families, right? So I think when you start to dive a little bit into the guts of it, and actually almost scare people into thinking what
Yeah.
will happen if there's a event that triggers that's big enough to put my job at risk, then they start to take it more seriously, and then from there they can then work with again the business leaders to work on strategies, and they can then also work with the rest of the employee base to actually make sure it doesn't happen.
I think that's actually a really good point because, as you said, if we keep saying it's not an if but when, are people going to get complacent? And then obviously, when complacency happens, you forget some of those things, and obviously that's kind of what gets us in trouble. But you mentioned around recovery time before. It's actually a lot longer than people think. It's not just a case of paying the ransom and everything's fantastic again, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And where Veeam wants to come into play as well is to basically take that option of paying the ransom out as well. We don't want anyone to think they have to pay the ransom because that at that point it's stressful, and then it doesn't guarantee that you get your data back. It doesn't guarantee you get all the data back, but more importantly, it doesn't guarantee that you won't get hit again. In
Mm,
fact, the reoffending rate for people that pay the ransom is significant because the bad guys, and it might not be the same bad guys, they kind of work out, okay, these guys are willing to pay a ransom, and they put
yeah.
that much
How
value
far
on
can
their
we
data.
go?
How far can we go? And we've
Mm,
actually had anecdotal evidence in some of the roundtables that we had last year, where we had one particular customer who got impacted three times within the space of 6 months. Every time they paid the ransom, then they got hit again. So at some point, you got to think that's not the best strategy, right? So recoverability is the most important part of this. When you talk about, I've talked about education. Central to the strategy is the actual data platform that
mm,
protects your core business, right? And so that's where Veeam comes in with our technology. We've in terms of being able to recover, it's not only about recovering, but recovering from a validated point that isn't infected, and that's the biggest part of recovery as well. And Veeam's been pretty strong in that sense from a technology point of view since we've introduced our instant VM recovery, which was the first to market all those years ago,
mm.
which all of our competitors now basically leverage and use as well, which is fine. But we're still very big on that as being the best in breed from a software perspective to get your copy of your data, which is validated quickly. Therefore, at that point, you can go back to the ransomware guys and say, "Sorry, we've got our data back. Your call."
Yeah, yeah. So you're actually taking back the control, which I think probably a lot of people
Absolutely.
don't realize that they can even do that.
No, that's correct.
And I know you mentioned, around, just obviously you're leading the way. You've got people now following in your footsteps as well. As well as having something like Veeam in place. What are some other strategies and things that people can have in place to provide better defense to really reduce that risk internally as well?
Yeah, so I guess from the point of view, again, at the front, education, we've talked about that. And
Yeah.
then the preventative systems as well. There's some great security vendors out there, which we partner with. We've announced a SOFO partnership. We've got a lot more coming. We work with our ecosystem partners, which is one of our great unique selling points and value adds, right? But in that, we can then rely on the professionals who are doing that front of house preventative security, application detection, whatever, malware detection, whatever it might be. Then to tell us to say, hey, something's wrong on the network. You might want to back up
Mhm.
something really quick. So we're really pushing forward with that sense as being central to that. And on the flip side, it's just about how you then react. That's more of the business aspect of it, where partners like yourselves can come into play
Yeah.
because that's where the rubber hits the road in terms of what happens after an event. So being aware of those three, I guess, phases in terms
Mm.
of protection, the actual doing of having a data platform that will back up, recover, and validate, then some sort of actionable steps after the fact to keep your business running. That's kind of the holy trinity of data protection in this year of
Mm.
ransomware again.
Yeah. And it's so true, bundling it into something like a managed, security service, having your team there, especially if you are a small business, that can actually go a really long way as to how quickly you can actually react. And actually, rather than it being react, it's more proactive because you've got a plan in place. Obviously, you talk to people all the time. What are some things that people miss when putting those plans together though, that can get them in trouble or can make it a little bit more difficult?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we've seen really is testing the recovery process, and
Okay.
that's something that I think people don't do enough. And what we've found again, just in talking with enterprises and small medium businesses, whatever it might be, service providers, partners, is that a business will not do that until they've been hit. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of reactionary sort of it's like this is classic insurance, right? Like you're paying for something that you feel you don't have to pay for until it's too late. That's where this comes into play. So being able to test the backups is critical. We still find that people and organizations aren't doing that enough.
They're like,
And
"Oh,
then
it's backed up, it's fine."
yeah, exactly. But there could be a case of there might be corruption in the backup software. The storage might have issues. You got to really test that as well, and because no system is infallible, right? Like everything could have a problem. But then what's more important, I think, of late is validating that backup.
Mm,
So making sure you can back it up, you can recover it, and then is it the right version that you want? Is it free of any nasties? And that's where a lot of our 12.1 release, which we did it towards the end of last year, with a lot of that malware detection, leveraging Yarrow rules to search through backup repositories, mount that backup live, and test it out, gives customers a really good base
mm,
point to know that if they do have to recover, are they going to recover something that isn't infected? So they're avoiding reinfection, which just
mm.
starts the whole process again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. You've given so many great tips today, but if there's one thing you wanna leave with listeners today, what would that be?
I think it's just to educate, test, and then recover. That's the biggest thing that we can go because again, I've said it before, and you said it. It's going to happen. You got to be ready for it.
Absolutely, and, yep, train your people so they know what to do so that you can be ready and be proactive. Well, thank you so much, Anthony, for your time today. It's been a really interesting discussion. I wish I could take more of your time, but, I know you're super busy, so thank you so much, and, yeah, look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, appreciate it a lot.